What do you want to do today?
I think we should talk about some stuff, and then after we talk, we should hit the big yellow square and then upload it. So I know that you edit, and I think you've mentioned it a couple times before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know exactly what you do when you edit, and I think it's probably more involved than our listeners would typically guess. Like, I think of the first pass level of editing as just simply cutting out mistakes or audio cruft that nobody would ever want to listen to, like a cough or a repeated word or an audio mistake or something like that. That's like the obvious, you just don't want that in there.
Right.
And then, okay, so once you get that done and you are going back and listening to a conversation we've had about a topic, I'm thinking the next level is that you might find some response or some statement or some back and forth that, while there's nothing wrong with it in terms of audio quality, it just doesn't hit your personal level of interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would cut that out. I'm going to get the sequence wrong here, but is that another level of...
That's another level. And in fact, I do that first. When we record a conversation, I listen back through it and I take out the large parts that I know is not going to be included because it wasn't an interesting part of the conversation.
Oh, okay. So I'm actually going backwards then in the sequence.
You're going backwards. So I try to do the large level cuts first,
right?
Like taking out 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time. Like if we have some bit at the end that didn't really work out or wasn't very interesting, I just chunk that out right off the bat. And then when I go through it on a second time, then I start getting into detail and taking out the little bits, the fine-tuning bits.
Right. So I think from the get-go, that first pass, people would be surprised that you do. And I think that's actually probably not that common in amateur podcasts. So like we record for a couple hours typically,
mm-hmm.
and our longest episode is an hour and 20 minutes.
Right. A lot of cruft comes out, yes.
So, I mean, we've joked in the past that our signal-to-noise ratio is not that high. So I've been wondering over the course of the podcast whether our signal-to-noise ratio has been getting better, but your standards have also been rising. Like there's sort of two passes, right? There's, was it interesting? And then there's, was it interesting enough for Tom? Right? Because you're lopping off huge chunks out of the record. Like if there was some topic that you felt just did not produce a certain level of interest, right?
Right. That's right. Yeah. I don't feel the pressure to include it because we do record more material than we need for a typical episode.
Right. So that sort of gives us the freedom to take a little more risk in terms of topic selection and exploration because...
That's right. Because half the time we don't even know what we're going to talk about.
Right. Like today.
Exactly.
So, well, how do you instantly know when you're listening back, like, oh, this is not going to make the cut? Or are you like, how do you, to me, that seems like making that qualitative assessment is the most difficult part of it. But it sounds, from what you're describing, that sounds pretty easy to you.
I usually have a pretty good sense of what's going to stay in and what's going to get cut as we're doing it, if you can believe that. Maybe this is a bit too meta,
dude.
For listeners.
Wait. A bit too meta, I don't think is a analysis that's going to cross this podcast. So,
well, I know it's not a bit too meta for you, but for the listener, it might be a bit too meta. And so, right now, I'm doing the calculation in my head: are we even going to keep this?
So so you have a sub-processing routine always running in the back of your head about is this going to make the cut or not?
I do, yeah.
Huh.
But when I listen back to the finished recording, that's when I double check those evaluations and say, yes, this was, my feeling about this was correct. It should come out. Or sometimes I have a bad feeling about something, but when I listen to it back, I'm like, oh, that was kind of funny. I'll keep that in, even though it makes me look kind of stupid or whatever.
I wonder if that affects how you contribute to the conversation as it's going along. Like, say we're 5 or 10 minutes into a conversational topic and your sub-processor routine is like the needle is pointing reject. I wonder if from that point on you just sort of mail it in, waiting for the next opportunity to arise.
I will admit that it has happened in the past.
Oh gosh, is it? Are there certain signals that I'm throwing up that you're like, oh, Ed's talking about XYZ. I'm gonna start to tune out now.
Usually, well, just speaking for myself, I usually have a pretty good idea of whether what I'm contributing is interesting to myself. And if it's not interesting to myself, then I'd like to think that's probably not going to be interesting to the listener either.
That is interesting because at the end of the day, we're trying to produce something that's interesting to other people, right?
That's right.
So the Venn diagram overlap of what is interesting to you and what is interesting to the listener might not be the same.
It might not. That's right. But as editor, that's the judgment I'm making.
Have you ever heard of the curse of knowledge?
Yeah, I think so.
So the curse of knowledge so Wikipedia's instant Google summary says, the curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias. You know how much I love cognitive biases. That occurs when an individual communicating with other individuals unknowingly assumes that the others have the background to understand. So it's called the curse of knowledge because if you take some topic that you have studied for a very long time and you know in great detail and you know so much about it, and then someone comes along who knows absolutely nothing and you try to explain the basics to them, it's often very difficult because you have such a vast, complex neural network of information and they have nothing that to put yourself in their shoes, that is to assume the mindset of learner when you are a professor, is complicated. And so it requires a little extra step. And so the analogy here is you have sort of the curse of interest, in that you already know what you're personally interested in. In fact, it's less of a knowing what you're interested in than a feeling, a reaction, right? And you're so wired into that automatic reaction that in order to get a sense of what other people might be interested in, you sort of have to consciously short circuit that a little bit. And yet, if you short circuit it too much, then what is it that you're going on, right? There's sort of a leap of faith from one's own evaluation to projecting what other people are going to evaluate.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have no way of knowing what people find interesting. I can only do my best guess, and my best guess is informed by what interests me. I tend to find certain things interesting, and so that's why I like talking to you about things, because you have an interest in interesting things.
An interest in interesting things.
Yes.
I have an interest in deconstructing what it is to be interested in interesting things.
Yeah, I'm not as interested in that.
I do sometimes mourn the cutting room floor a little bit. So, like, week after we record, you send me the first rough cut.
Yeah.
It's pretty close to the final version.
Yeah, it's usually pretty close. Content-wise, it's usually pretty close.
So the first time that's the first time I'm hearing what's made it in and what hasn't made it in. and as we're recording, I'm not writing down all the topics that we got into. So I just have kind of like a week ago kind of vague memory of it. And then as I'm listening to the recording and it's getting closer to the end, subconsciously I'm realizing that like big things didn't make it in. And it's very much like waking up from a dream that you were having and you're trying to remember the dream after you've woken up, but the harder you try and remember, it just escapes you. So it's like I can hear my mind like pruning off these threads of like, well, you don't have to think about that anymore. It's gone. But I'm like, well, what was it? And just having this sort of vague sense of loss.
Did that conversation even happen?
Exactly. So there's all these levels now of I don't know what we've talked about before. Because sometimes we'll talk about stuff on email or we'll bring up a topic or have a slight back and forth and then that won't even make it into the raw record.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when they removed the monitor from the back of Ender's head and he's like, what was back there? I can't remember.
Yeah.
The cutting room floor.
A little self-indulgent of us to talk about it.
Yeah, maybe.
My little alarm bell's going off in my head.
That's right. You're like, ooh, I'm going to cut this one out. Ooh, that would be wicked meta. Now we can analyze and deconstruct whether this particular thread will be cut out or not. How meta can you get? Yeah. Oh, micro follow-up from last time. I was talking about how Devo had the perfect cover song of...
Yeah, that made it through the cut.
Yes, it did. I was very happy to see that. You even tweeted about it, which was great. It's like, I clicked through that and had a nice listen. And then I remembered one of my favorite satire songs. Dare to Be Stupid by Weird Al.
Oh dear.
I have a huge soft spot for Weird Al.
Yes, I know. I'm amazed it's taken this long for us to get to this, but you have an unnatural affection for Weird Al Yankovic, don't you?
I have a very natural and logical affection for Mr. Yankovic. So he was the first person I ever saw live in concert.
Of course he was.
In 1985, he opened up for the Monkees, and it was a wonderful show. He burned his accordion on fire like Jimmy at Monterey. It's a nice little production there. Anyway, he has a song, Dare to Be Stupid, which is I would call it a pastiche, which is he's not satiring like Whip It by Devo or a particular song, but he's doing a song, an original song in the style of a band, which is a bit harder to do, but when he pulls it off is really cool. Right, so right. That's his Devo pastiche, Dare to Be Stupid. So that's a pastiche of a cover of a song. So I like those levels of meta.
Nice and meta.
Yeah, totally. I just wanted to plug Mr. Allen there. Another one of the members of my Geek Hall of Fame.
Yep.
I heard from Brother X.
Oh, you heard from Brother X? I haven't heard from Brother X in a while.
Yes. Yeah, he sort of flared up at the beginning and then was sight unseen for no... Well, it's sort of understandable. He comes home usually about once a year around the Christmas holiday time.
Yep.
And so, so he comes back, makes an appearance.
Will he be approaching Earth this Christmas?
Will he be approaching... What?
Will his orbit bring him close to us this Christmas?
Yes.
Okay.
So he's in Japan.
Yep.
And he usually comes back, and it coincides now with the release of the Star Wars movies.
Of course it does.
So that is now like the big event that we plan when we...
Yep.
First thing we do when we see each other is go out and see the new Star Wars movie with the fam. So that's what we're doing. We currently have it scheduled for 8 days after the Last Jedi comes out.
Yep.
So I'm not sure how spoiler-free I'm going to be able to keep myself. I want to be relatively spoiler-free, I say, meaning
yep.
I will click upon speculative rumor videos, but I don't want a complete transcript of exactly what happens.
But Brother X is going in spoiler-free though, right? Isn't he?
Oh, ultra. Like he said, he's been at movies and he doesn't want to see trailers. He walks out of theaters if the trailer's going on. If people are having a conversation, he's like, and I think he has an outside shot to be spoiler free because he's below average connected in terms of social media and the internet.
That's right.
He's not on Facebook. He's in another country, so he might be able to, slide in there, but we'll see. Looking forward to that. Did you also see, speaking of Star Wars news, that they green-lighted a new trilogy?
Yeah, they must be really happy with what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi. I'm sure we'll soon find out, I guess, but another new trilogy is coming.
Right, no details other than it doesn't involve any of the current characters. Same storied universe, but different thing altogether. Yeah, so we've been over the problems that the Star Wars movies have had with directors, so this is an early good indicator, eh?
Yeah, if he gets signed up for 3 more movies and without his other movie having been released yet, that's they must have been very happy with it.
Yes, and Brother X would consider this spoilers, by the way.
Oh, that's true.
He doesn't want any indication whether it's good or bad. So
he just needs to know that it's in the theater and what time it is, right?
Pretty much blindfold him, walk him to his seat, and then when the crawl comes up, then unleash the blindfold. That's his modus operandi.
So would he even want to know that there's another trilogy coming?
I don't think so. No, I don't think he wants to know anything.
What do you think of that Lord of the Rings news?
So, did I catch this right? There's going to be a Lord of the Rings television show?
A television series, yes, of the Lord of the Rings, or something related to the Lord of the Rings, produced by Amazon.
And it's going to be prequeled in the history to the Fellowship movies.
I don't think that's completely clear yet. They've described it as a Lord of the Rings series, but they've also indicated that it can delve into areas that occur prior to the main storyline in the 3 books.
Okay.
But initial announcements haven't had much more information than that, other than they paid a boatload of money for it.
I would imagine. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm cool with that. So I read the books before the Peter Jackson movies, but I felt like the Peter Jackson movies did such a fantastic job with them
Mm-hmm.
that the reason why I like those movies so much was yes, in part Tolkien and the story and the world and all that, but just what a great job Peter Jackson did. It could have been done badly as well. So to hear that they're doing something else, Lord of the Rings, I mean, I would be interested in checking it out, but I don't know. There's
You're not a Tolkien super fan?
am I a Tolkien super fan? So if I'm going to be honest with you, Tom, I'm a pretty lazy reader. And if you read The Fellowship of the Rings, it is a lot slower than the movies. Like when the hobbits are journeying from the Shire to Bree,
Yeah.
it takes forever. Like
Sounds perfect for a TV series.
and you really have to enjoy descriptions of rolling countryside. There are pages and pages and pages of really nicely described, hills and trees and all that. So all that's to say is to admit to you that no, I have not read them 100 billion times. Plus, I think the adaptations of The Hobbit show that you can only pour so much into a thin story before it feels like stretched too thin, like butter scraped over too much bread.
Nice. Yeah, the Hobbit movies are terrible, weren't they?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the prequels. You could probably extract 30, 45 minutes of highlights from all of them and have yourself a fun evening. But
yeah, I liked most of the first movie, the first Hobbit movie, but by the time you got to the second one and Fat Legolas showing up in Lake Town and
Fat Legolas.
And then the third movie was just degenerated into just some action fiasco. I don't know what it was. It was awful, awful, awful. That was painful to watch. Having enjoyed the original Lord of the Rings movie so much, it didn't seem like it was the same director doing these films.
It's never nice to see your heroes get fat, is it? So, did you like the HFR, the high frame rate? Did you happen to see the Hobbit in that?
No. I never saw the Hobbit in the high frame rate version. I only saw the regular non 3D regular cinema experience version.
I was really interested in the HFR, so I saw the Hobbit HFR, and I really did not like it. It was too crisp and clear and detailed. It was like watching a soap opera. You know that kind of like hyper realism.
Yeah. The 24 frames per second that normal film has is it gives you the feeling that you're watching a film. Once you change that, once you go to like 30 frames per second like TV has, it starts to feel different. It starts to feel a bit more. It loses that film quality that you're used to when you watch a film.
Right. It's like pull me into another world. Don't make it appear as if I'm already in this world.
Yeah,
I guess is the feel.
Getting back to the Amazon news, I thought that was a surprising story when I first saw that the other day about the TV series being produced. Considering what we know about the history of the Tolkien estate protecting the legacy of J.R.R. Tolkien's works, they've held that material very close to the chest.
Right.
Especially his J.R.R. Tolkien's son, Christopher Tolkien, has been in charge of Tolkien's literary legacy, and he's been very adamant about his disapproval about a lot of these adaptions.
Right.
So I was a bit surprised to see that Amazon had managed to pry the rights to a TV series out of the Tolkien estate. But then I read a few days later that apparently Christopher Tolkien has resigned as the head of the Tolkien estate, in charge of the Tolkien legacy. Huh. So the grandchildren of Tolkien are now in charge, or at least we think they're in charge of the intellectual property of Middle Earth, basically.
Mm.
So that may be the reason why all of a sudden Amazon is able to produce a series, and that may be an indication that the dam is about to burst and a whole bunch of other products or TV or movie or games or whatever start being created out of the Middle Earth universe,
right?
Which is probably a bit worrisome to the hardcore Tolkien fanatic.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar worry with the Star Wars universe. I mean, now that we're gonna get movies every single year, it just dilutes the the specialness of the event, I
Right,
guess.
exactly. Yeah, if there's going to be 20, 30 Star Wars movies, there's going to be a lot more chances for really bad Star Wars movies, more so than we had in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, the mainline ones will always be popular enough and big enough cash cows that they'll always be reasonably well done. But that is odd when you think about the Lord of the Rings stuff. So I like a lot of the mythology in the first and the second age. There's some interesting stuff there. There's not a lot of. I'm speaking out of turn, but there aren't a lot of complex narratives going on there. There's the Iluvatar, and then
You've read the Silmarillion?
again, Tom, I've like familiar with what's in it, but have I quote unquote read it? No.
How do you know all this stuff about the first and second age of Middle Earth then?
Because I love reading about the mythology. I love mythology.
Ah, you read the Wikipedia summaries.
Exactly. I don't want to read 500 pages of there were these powerful dudes and then they went to this island, but then those people got upset. These people, they had a big fight and this other mean person. It's like, give me the structure. Give me the idea.
Well, yeah, if Christopher Tolkien is no longer involved in these decisions, that might mean the Silmarillion itself might be up for being adapted for a television series.
Right.
But all that mythology and cosmology that Tolkien came up with for Middle Earth, covering thousands of years of history, a lot of that's just high level outline, not as detailed as the Lord of the Rings books are.
Right.
So there's a lot of room for what I fear is going to be a lot of bad fan fiction. Trying to fill in the details, draw these high level storylines that he imagined for the first and second age of Middle Earth.
Right. There's one strong, I wouldn't say strong, but there's one known narrative in there. Aragorn mentions this when they're on their way to Rivendell. The Luthien, the love story there between
the tale of Beren and Luthien.
Yeah, there you go. Which is it's a corollary to Aragorn and an elfie lady there whose name I don't recall.
Arwen.
Boy, Tom, as a little, what's on the opposite of follow up? If I'm going to reference something we haven't talked about, what we'll talk about. How can I reference a future episode? What do we call that?
Preamble.
As manner of preamble, I'm definitely honing in on a word recall topic. The fact that I'm dynamically expressing what I'm saying and how the mind functions to do that, and what happens when you forget a word and how the mind recalls words. I find that fascinating. Endlessly fascinating. So, little micro preamble there for you.
So, yeah, I might pull out the old books again and read them again just to remind myself that the books are better than anything that I could possibly put on the television. But I'll probably watch it. What am I saying? I know I'll watch it.
Is that one of the universes that will absolutely hook you in no matter what?
Well, I'll certainly give it a shot. I mean, I was so disappointed with the last Hobbit movie. It was so bad. I've only seen it the one time. I just don't have no desire to see it again.
Right.
But I will certainly give it a try if there's going to be a TV series on Amazon. I will certainly give it a fair shake.
It's very magnanimous of you, Tom.
So I finished. We talked about Stranger Things last time. I finished out that series. They had a good first edition Monster Manual reference towards later in the series. You were asking about D&D.
Oh yeah.
So that did sneak in later.
Nice.
So. I like the first series better, but the second series was still fun.
Same universe. They just go off on a different arc.
It's a follow on from the first series. It's just a continuation of the main threat that was in the first series is more expanded upon. And there'll probably be a third series too. But after having watched that, something that occurred to me while watching these kids in 1984 riding their bikes all over their neighborhoods and getting into trouble and getting into adventures, it occurred to me that series, apart from having all the weird clothes and hairstyles, might seem really weird to modern viewers by the fact how much freedom the kids have.
terms of parental.
Parental supervision, right, and the lack of it.
Right.
And that was something I wanted to ask you about because I'm not a parent.
Apparently.
So I have no direct experience with this, but I observe of other parents is that parents today are absolutely insane.
You're just gonna throw out there and blanket statement the whole subgroup. Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay.
I think they're insane,
Okay,
at least in the
insane.
United States.
Right.
So since you are a parent,
Yes.
I wanted to get your opinion on that. Are you insane?
Do you think well, let me ask you this, Tom. Do you think I'm insane?
I don't know, but I would guess that you're probably on the more sane side.
So you're holding out the possibility that people you don't know are sane
Yes.
when you make your blanket
Yes.
judgment of all parents.
There is a possibility, but just in general, observing how little freedom kids today seem to have,
Okay.
it strikes me as really weird as someone who grew up at the time that the kids in Stranger Things were growing up, and the amount of freedom they had was not unusual.
So when you say you observe, can I Pulp Fiction you and ask you for an example?
For example, I've seen a neighbor drive their child to the end of their driveway to wait for their bus.
Okay.
The kid gets on the bus, then the parent drives the car back up the driveway again.
Right. All right.
That's a bit weird to me.
Would this be on a really cold day, like an exceptionally cold day, or just a random chilly day?
No, this is like every day.
Oh, so not even when it's cold out.
No.
Interesting. So there's always the possibility that there's the kid has some like issues.
Of course, yeah.
Right. Some sort of anxiety or whatever. But
right.
if we Occam razor the thing, then so that's an example of going a bit too far with the supporting, enabling of going through life.
Well, let me back up a bit.
All right.
Walking around my neighborhood, I never see children anywhere riding their bikes, playing outside, nowhere. It's like we're in a world just filled with adults. The kids are hidden away somewhere. I never see them. When I was a kid, our neighborhood was full of kids running around all the time.
Right.
And I don't see that anywhere anymore. Where did they all go?
And you have if you had a bike, you could bike the neighborhood, for example.
Yeah.
So the explanation for that could be the first two things I think of there are electronic entertainment, but there's also a parenting style that could be imposed in there. So let's table the digital influence for a moment, because what you're kind of talking about is, if you thought about it in terms of parental oversight of child activity and behavior, as kind of a range from helicopter parenting, you might call it, on one age, to like what might be termed in pop culture free range kids. And so helicopter parenting at the extreme is to hover like a helicopter over everything and to be ultra protective, take no risks, physical, emotional, mental. Failure is bad. Protect from the harsh, scary world. And free range parenting at the extreme would be kick them out of the nest and see how they do. And,
Yes.
Sink or swim. Right? And hey, if you're going to learn to be an adult, you're going to be an adult, and such as it is. So, from my personal parenting perspective and experience, first of all, I try and remind myself that every individual situation is completely different, and so that you can't like ascribe one principle or approach to every situation. And and who am I? I'm just one guy with I have 3 kids, so I have 3 different sort of parenting examples, but
Right.
my kids are their own unique situation, just like any kid is. So, so I really hesitate to judge anybody for doing anything or approaching anything a particular way, even if it seems obvious what the
Of course,
the intent is.
But in general, I'm sure you socialize with other parents.
Yeah.
In general, do you think something's different today than it was back when we were kids?
Yes. So I kind of think of parenting as a slow letting go from birth to adulthood,
Mhm.
where at the very beginning, your child is completely dependent on you. So, I mean, pre-birth, a child is 100.00% dependent on the mother, right? And then once they're born, that starts the very, very beginning of independence. I mean, I remember being like, woken up with a start the first time that our kids slept through the night. Because you bring an infant home, and typically they're going to wake up every few hours. And that goes on for a long time sometimes. So, months later, when we woke up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, you're like, oh my God, you run in to make sure they're not dead, right? That's a pretty common parenting experience. And
Yeah.
so, okay, they've learned to like sleep on their own. They've achieved that level of independence, right? And so, so as you continue to expand on that, some things it becomes less obvious where you apply that than in others. Like you wouldn't play with your 2-year-old in the yard, and then when the ball bounces into the busy street, just say, sink or swim, free range. We'll see. Let's see how the kid does in the freeway, right? Because
Of course, right.
because the consequence of that action is too devastating at that time. And so you calibrate, but you're making a calibrated, even though that's an extreme example, you're making a calibrated judgment. I mean, I remember the first time that I let our kids, you mentioned biking, our kids, love to bike, but this is, again, probably the reason they love to bike is because my wife was really adamant about that they do that and that they get outside. But I remember the first time that they biked around the neighborhood by themselves, and it's like, oh my God, what if a car comes on the street and they're not looking and the car hits them? Wouldn't it be safer if I was there with them? I'm like, okay, yeah, objectively it would be a little safer, but at some point you want them to have the ability to navigate the world themselves. And so, are they ready? Have they been trained and practiced enough to be able to handle this situation on their own? If they are, then go ahead. And so again, it's another sort of calibration.
Well, it seems like the calibration these days is that dividing line between where the parents let go is later and later and later.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have any one great answer to this. I think there are multiple factors going on. I mean, just off the top of my head, another sort of quintessential example that comes to mind is your kids at the playground and they fall down and they scrape their knee and they cry.
Mm-hmm.
And then they look to you, and the thing that's interesting is that, so kids when they're really young will look to you because they've never had the experience of falling down and hurting themselves before. And so they have this instant reaction, and then they look to you as a cue as to what to do. Mm-hmm. And so if you're like, oh my God, my little honey, are you okay? Even though it's just a little scrape, then you're training them that this is a big deal, and that they are helpless, and that they need to overreact to it, and that you will come and save them from this calamity.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yep.
Now, if they fell down and they broke their leg and it was sticking out, that might be an appropriate time to go over there, but you're calibrating your reaction, right? But I think it does take some conscious effort to allow them to have that kind of experience of like, yeah, you know what, you're all right. You're like, what, you can get, even though inside you might be feeling like, oh, I just want to go over there and comfort them. You can objectively understand that they're okay, and so you allow them to have that experience, and that empowers them to be able to independently get through similar scrapes in the future. I think a lot of this comes down to how consciously do you want to invest in making an effort at parenting. I think the issue is much less bad parenting than it is absentee parenting. By absentee parenting, I don't mean like not being helicopter enough. I mean just not consciously engaging in the responsibility of the role.
I'm not convinced by that.
So let me give you an example. Like I think I've seen some kids being inappropriate with other kids on the playground.
Yep.
Like maybe they're bullying, maybe they're being physically dangerous, and their parents are right there, typically on their cell phones, and they're not intervening. Now, you could say, oh, well, kids will be kids, and, they have to work through their troubles themselves. But there's a certain line comes where if there's a 10-year-old that is bullying a 6-year-old, you don't just keep letting that go on, or let them do something really dangerous. And so you can use the oh, we shouldn't be helicopter. We need to let kids be kids and, grow up and understand the world for themselves as an excuse not to engage in the job of parenting. Because ultimately, I think that being a good parent is about sacrificing your time. It takes time, and it necessarily takes time away from something that you would otherwise be spending your time on. Therefore, it's a sacrifice. And I think that because society and the world is not going to make you be a good parent. I mean, there's certain minimal qualifications that the law says, things you can't do. But the law is not going to force you to be a conscious parent and think about that level of calibration. So, I mean, I'm not trying to make a wholesale defense of helicopter parenting. I'm just saying it's not as simple as saying we either ought to kick them out of the nest, sink or swim, or fully protect them from everything.
Yeah, I don't think it should be either of those extremes, obviously. But just thinking back on my own childhood, I spent a lot of time on my own in the neighborhood playing with other kids in the afternoons or on the weekends without any supervision, without any adult supervision. But I also don't think I had any lack of parenting during that time as well.
Right.
I think there is a good balance that you can have that is being lost. Things that kids would do normally in art, back in the 80s when we were kids, if kids did that today, their parents would be visited by social services, which seems insane. Things that we thought were just completely normal.
Yeah, I don't know if it's as extreme and monochromatic as you're making it out to be. I think it's quite different depending on the geography.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
What neighborhood you're growing up in? Like, is your neighborhood bikeable? I guess the three sort of general themes I'm swirling around and I don't exactly know how they balance out related way are the allure of technology and the insideification of kid culture.
Mm-hmm.
Just the evolution of geography in which it's just not easy to walk out of your door and have 12 of your friends within walking distance. And then there's also the just the evolution of society in the US where it feels like there is less of a shared value center, I guess.
Yeah.
It's hard to say whether the world, quote unquote, feels like a more dangerous place today than it did 30 years ago. I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't think it's true. I think people believe that, but I don't think it's true.
Okay. I'm trying to be wise for you, Tom, and I feel like I'm failing you.
I just want, I didn't know where this was going to go. It's just maybe it's too difficult of a topic to kind of wrap your head around on the fly.
Yeah.
It's just I read a lot of stories online about the way things used to be and the way things are now, and the concept of free range parenting. I suppose it's kind of selection bias there of the things that I'm reading are intended to make me angry or make me
Right.
wistful for a forgotten time. But it just seems like something's changed in our society that shouldn't have changed. Then again, I'm not a parent, so what do I know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard for me to say. That's why I want to kind of bounce it off you and see what you had to say about it.
Yeah, I find it hard on the fly to tease it out from other parenting trends that I feel are equally as strong,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's so dependent on the context of where you're growing up. Like my kids all learned to ride bikes, and they rode bikes when they were kids and hung out and stuff. In their high school years, their peers are more scattered across the town.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like they just walk out the door and hang out with their friends.
Well, maybe I was just lucky with geography when I was growing up.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there can be an extremeness with the nostalgia of like, back in my day, you could fall down and just get a Band-Aid, and our mother would just let us out for the day and expect us back for dinner, and everything was great, and we rode in the back seat of rear-facing station wagons, and nobody got hurt. And this sort of whitewashing of the past. So I don't know. I find that the pressures on parenting are more about, to me, it's a time-consuming job of self-sacrifice. And so if you feel pressed for time and overwhelmed by your job and other commitments in life, then you're naturally, it's going to be more difficult for you to do that job of parenting. For example, I don't think it's a positive free range development that parents stick an iPad in their 2-year-old's hands and shut them up. It's parents do that because it shuts them up because it turns them off, and it's easier to manage a kid's time with a screen, and that's a pretty distressing. I think we talked a slightly bit before that there are a number of kids who don't know how to ride a bike.
Mm-hmm.
Some kids that don't know how to tie their shoes,
Right.
or other skills that have atrophied, just because you don't have the time. One thing you had mentioned when you were talking about having some time, I think there is a great value to being bored and being alone.
Yes.
And my entire childhood wasn't boring, or when I wasn't, thankfully alone the whole time. But I definitely had long stretches of an afternoon or days or even weeks that were uninteresting, or I spent time by myself. I mean, to circle back to Weird Al, the reason I have a core affection for Weird Al on the Mount Rushmore of Geek is I remember on a Saturday night with nothing to do and turning on the radio and hearing the networked broadcast of Dr. Demento. And, he would chime in and listen to some Weird Al songs. That was the first time, and I felt like slightly connected. It was sort of like listening to a podcast, right? But you had this like little niche audience of fairly geeky content, and so I think there's for character development, there's something very valuable about that. One of the reasons why I hesitated to get a smartphone for so long is that it vacuums up all those little moments of boredom and lack of stimulation, in being by yourself. So part of it's like why do kids go outside anyway? I mean, I remember a number of times in my childhood, my parents just making us go outside.
Yeah,
just because they didn't want us. I think it may have been just because they didn't want us underfoot. And then we would go outside, and we would initially be just like, oh, what are we going to do all day? So, that doesn't happen today because there's always some raging, compelling screen of content ready to pull you in.
Yeah, it seems like kids are overscheduled these days too, with all these activities. Like every moment of their day is scheduled somehow. At least what I observe from other families. I mean, again, I don't know. I don't have first-hand experience with this, but
yeah, so I have two reactions to that. Maybe the second one will add a little clarity as to why I'm finding this such a difficult type of question to answer.
Yeah.
So overscheduled. So this is a topic that my wife and I have talked about quite a bit as our kids have gotten older,
mm-hmm.
and we've continued to talk about it precisely because we don't have a really clean, bright, natural, that's the balance of letting your kids do things and having them be overscheduled. And so it requires constantly revisiting this. So, it's like one of my kids really loves playing viola. And so like he plays in this orchestra outside of school. And that's quite a time commitment.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
And it decreases his downtime. And another one of my kids loves dancing. And so she goes to these dance classes, which is another big, time commitment. And this also involves a lot of, driving, right? So the family life quickly gets busy. So you add a sport, you add an activity on top of homework, and then sleep, and then you pretty much have all of your time filled the entire day. And once you hit that post-elementary age, you can get on a track pretty quick. And then if you get really anxious about academic performance, there's an infinite amount of prep you can do for college and college tests and tutoring and all that. And you only have one chance to be young, right?
Mm-hmm.
You only have one opportunity for your mind to evolve and for your character to develop and to have a relatively unencumbered existence before getting slapped onto the day shift for 40 years, right? So is even if someone is enjoying those activities, is that something that we ought to push back on and say, okay, just these two things, but no more, or are there types of these things that ought to go away? Like, should we encourage the the musical arts and only the academics if it's a pure joy, and push back on things that are prep for higher education, and yet higher education is pretty meaningful in terms of the rest of their life. So that's like a short snippet of how we've sort of gone through this particular parenting question, and I come at the end of it of like we're still like going through it. We still think about these things all the time because there is no one answer, and I do kind of feel, without getting too cheesy on you, Tom. All right, is that I do feel in the modern era of the nuclear family, where there is not an easily accessible extension, support, and knowledge network in your own family, and then with your family's connection with the greater community. When you're essentially isolated pods, like coexisting with many other isolated pods, you're left to figure out all of these things by yourself. And they're very important things to figure out, right? Like there is no, very much like Greatest American Hero, there's no
instruction manual.
Exactly. When you're a parent, that you find out. And, new parents and parents-to-be find this out very quickly. They'll, and there's a whole industry that is waiting to sell you the myth that there is a book that you can just pick up and read and figure this out. And once you confront that reality face to face, the magnitude of the responsibility and the time and effort demand of the task, you kind of have to make a conscious decision of how seriously am I going to take this job, right? And so one of my reactions to the free range parenting of the way that can turn negative with absentee parenting is I see a lot of parents that just check out of the responsibility of the job. That's one way to do it.
Yep.
And if enough people do that, and you feel like you would not be convicted by a jury of your peers, it becomes all the more easy to do. One parent throwing an iPad in their toddler's worldview will trigger half a dozen others. And then it becomes harder then to stake out for yourself actions and approaches that you feel are right. And so they really have to come from principle. And so, like, where are they coming from? So I think one of the things that's lost in this nuclearized family is you lose the wisdom of generations. It's not just that, like, I couldn't call up my own parents and say, "Hey, what did you do when I was a?" Mm-hmm. But families used to be a lot physically closer together,
multi-generational,
right? And so instead of having every generation having to figure it out all over again, you could absorb the wisdom of the generations, even if your parents had done things quote unquote wrong. You absorb their mistakes and their successes, and then you're able to evolve upon that, as opposed to starting from square one. I mean, imagine if technological society had to restart every generation. We wouldn't be getting very far. Right?
Yeah. All right. So I guess I should just shut up and let parents get on with it.
No, it's you raise a good question.
Yeah, I realize I'm probably coming off a little looking back in the good old days type of wistfulness that is dreadfully boring to people today. But I just wanted to remark on the fact that Stranger Things had it exactly right as far as in my experience. I mean, every day, every weekend, ride my bike down to a neighbor's house in the neighborhood and play D&D all day or spend all day out in the woods.
Right.
We weren't fighting, demogorgons, but we were getting into trouble here and there.
Right. Well, you've given me much to reponder as a parent, Tom.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good to be conscious.
I'm sure you're doing a wonderful job. I know you're doing a wonderful job. I've seen your kids, and they're wonderful.
Thank you very much. Well, Tom, to lighten the mood, can I pick up your spirits? Can I sing you a little song?
Well, no.
Just something to make you pick up the peppiness for you. Oh, death. Oh, death. Won't you buy me time for another life? The road is long and please, Tom, don't cut this. I was thinking of singing on the podcast because there's been a tweet storm of our fans.
No, there has not.
Demanding it.
One tweet is not a tweet storm.
It was multiple tweets. I may have participated in the multiple tweets.
Yeah, multiple tweets being your tweets.
Yeah. Well, I had death on the mind, Tom.
Oh dear. Okay. One of my favorite subjects.
Well, we were talking about death the other day.
Yep.
Well, I was trying to make you talk about death the other day.
You were trying to.
There's been a little bit of anti-death sentiment expressed recently that has been a bit concerning to me. And some of my favorite podcasts and YouTube channels, CGP, Mr. Gray,
Yep.
promoted this idea of a word that I will butcher. And so, Tom, you can tell me what it is. And that word is...
Senescence?
Yes, thank you. And
Okay.
say it again because I missed it the first time.
Senescence.
Senescence, which is...
It's just another word for biological aging.
Oh, so he was describing it as the disease of senescence.
Right. This is CGP Grey on his recent video on aging, and they had a discussion on the Hell Internet about it too, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and there was a video that came out about the same time on an explanatory video channel called, I'm going to butcher it again,
Kurzgesagt?
what is it?
Kurzgesagt?
Kurzgesagt, thank you. So, briefly, the other tweet storm, Tom, was a desire to have an entire episode where I just butchered every word, and so I think I'm well on my way to doing that for this episode, so you won't have to do too much editing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, not to completely represent their argument, but essentially saying, hey, we should look at death as this scourge, this disease that is 100% fatal, and we really ought to be directing our attention to eradicating it and the search for immortality, and why just accept death, et cetera, et cetera.
And so you're going to tell us that you're pro-death.
At the moment, I'm fairly pro-death. I'm pro accepting of the likely reality of one's situation. Let me put it that way. And so I think first of all, so they talked about this funny little idea of, wouldn't it be terrible to be the last person who died? Like, technology and medicine is advancing, but they just didn't catch up to you, and you're the last person to die. And then after that, everybody lives.
Yeah.
I think for where we are right now in the evolution of history, that is a complete and utter fantasy for anybody who's alive right now. And I think to direct one's mental attention into that hope is to avoid the real positive benefit that contemplating death can have, which is that it focuses your attention on the stark reality that you may die any moment. And thus the clearest, strongest reality that we have the most difficulty integrating in a full way that completely impacts our lives' actions and how we utilize time is just that, the ephemeral nature of our existence, and that we will not last forever. And so therefore the need to make every moment count, to be mindful of utilizing our time and not putting off to tomorrow what you can do today. And I think there's so much of mental and emotional atrophy in the course of a human existence that can be attributed to this blasé sort of presumption that we all know is illogical, that you're going to live forever.
So death provides a useful service to humanity, even despite all the pain and suffering it causes?
I'd say awareness of death. And I would further say that death gets a little bit of a bad rap here. I mean, there's a ton of pain and suffering that death has absolutely nothing to do with. I mean, if you're looking to raise the quality of life for yourself and humanity, there are 100 things prior to death that should be addressed first. I would put man's inhumanity to man above death. You solve that, and then you solve a lot of other unhealthy, damaging things that are going on in the world. And then if you can accept the probability that medical science is not going to solve death for you, and that you're not going to live forever, then you can embrace that experience with a lot more peace and understanding, I think, than if you are dragged kicking and screaming with every last punch thrown by modern medical science. God forbid you got cancer or something. Would you want to spend 6 months of relative calm, or would you want to spend 9 months in incredible pain going through really intensive, debilitating therapies? Right? I mean, it's the kind of serious choices that people have to make.
Yeah.
It's also not surprising to me that a lot of these calls for, hey, we really ought to redirect our time, energy, and resources to curing death comes from people who are economically very well off. And they're sort of looking around like, well, gee, what could possibly affect me and my personal comfort in life? It's, oh yeah, death. Death and all the terrible things that happen to you when you get really old, and sickness and all that. So it doesn't typically feel like it's coming from a, selfless, beneficent kind of mindset. This is a lot more of pressing matters, I think, that are contributing to the calculus of human suffering other than death.
Well, isn't combating senescence through self-interest, even though it's self-interest, isn't that beneficial to the larger society?
Sure. I mean, if you got chickenpox and you found a cure for chickenpox because you wanted to save your own skin, and that benefits everybody, sure, why not?
Yeah.
I do, though, hear an undercurrent in these arguments of like, we're all just missing the boat. Hey, people, we ought to really all be focused on the bigger picture of solving death. It's somewhat analogous to the humanity get off the planet. Do we really do we really want everybody to be living forever if the current state of humanity is what it is? Like, don't we have some other behaviors to clean up first before we tackle that problem?
All right. So you're against genetic immortality or practical immortality, I guess. But what about just life extension? What about just living twice as long as you do now? Is that a worthy pursuit?
I guess, just to be honest, I guess I'm just blasé about it.
Okay. Well, what about half as long?
Well, there are many people that live half as long.
Yeah. Are they better? Are they better off if we improve their lifespan?
Yes, but we know how to do that today.
We didn't, though.
Why are the individuals who are economically well off and are probably going to live to a ripe old age the ones focused on extending life to 100 plus, 200 plus, and not the people that are struggling to get by and dying at an earlier age and have a much higher level of physical and economic suffering?
Well, the first world societies have the resources to tackle a problem that big for the benefit of all.
Yeah, but would you want to live 200 years if it was full of pain and suffering?
I'd like to have the option to. If I wanted to take that exit, I could.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to come off as I'm arguing against it.
It sounds like you are.
Well, no. If you tell me like, oh, I could press a button, everybody lives twice as long, I know I would have a hard time coming up with a strong argument against it. I just think it misdirects what the pressing, urgent problem of the species is. It's not like everything's going awesome and we just need to extend the reel.
Well,
this movie has a lot of problems that need to be cleaned up in editing. We don't need the movie to go 6 hours long.
There's loads and loads of problems that we have as a civilization, but we can't all pull in the same direction at once. People have to tackle different parts of the problem and break down the major problems into smaller chunks and tackle those problems. If people choose to try to tackle senescence, hey, good luck to them, right? It's going to have a long-term benefit for humanity, and people who tackle different problems will improve things for humanity as well. It's just the fact that we have so many people tackling different problems at once is what gives progress to society, and not just tackling one problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally on board with that. I wouldn't go to the next level and say, let's stop cancer research and fund death research, which seems to be the suggestion when you get to the ends of these pitch videos about implying that we're really all missing what we ought to be focusing on. Well, it's not just like, hey, should we study? Sure, go ahead and study it.
I mean, that's one of the ways you make a point is through hyperbole,
right?
But making the point that increasing the healthy span of a person's lifespan makes sense, considering that the last few years of life is fairly grim. If you can increase the span of time that you have living in health, rather than trying to prolong the parts of your life when your body is falling apart, that probably makes more long-term sense. Is the point I think of those they're trying to make.
I mean, maybe we're talking about two sides of the same coin, but I also feel like another reason why I would also not accept that it's biologically necessary that the last X number, few, several, whatever years of life have to be grim and terrible and painful. I think that there is a steep cliff of malady and disease that we bring upon ourselves by the misuse and miscare of our physical selves. I think it's possible to age in a normal lifespan and not have the last number of years be terrible. And I think we lose sight of that because of the impact of modern nutrition, exercise, mental habits, etc.
Well, that all goes into trying to increase the health span, which is rolled into what they're talking about.
So perhaps it's two sides of the same coin. But I mean not necessarily, hey, let's live to 200, because even though it will all still stink at the last 5 years, we'll get 195 years of awesomeness. Mm-hmm. I mean, like accepting that, the last 5 to 10 years is going to be this terrible cliff of insanity of fighting the painful Grim Reaper is not necessarily what has to happen. I think it could be a graceful ending.
If immortality was offered to you, would you take it?
No.
If life extension was offered to you, would you take it?
Give me a quick example.
Like if you could live to 200 years.
No. I have a too long for this podcast episode feeling of I want to be a natural human, and that ties into what I feel myself to be in terms of my being and consciousness, and I would not do those things now. I have a pretty strong sense of an innate feel of myself beyond my physical self, and so I'm not that worried about death in terms of it being the end all be all of my existence. I guess is the very short way to say that. So I'm not so worried about living to 8,000 or whatever. How about yourself?
Just to understand that you're content that there's something beyond what you consider your life experience now. Therefore, you're looking forward to finding out what that is.
Yeah, phrased like that, it's hard to answer, and and it misdirects my base feeling. Again, I'm not trying to make some sort of hardcore argument here. I'm just sort of articulating my incomplete feel here. But is there something, quote unquote, after death, like like a port of call that I'm going to be, in some manner physically at?
Yes.
That is separate from this physical atness?
Yes.
And that's not how I conceive of it. What I do feel is an eternalness to the nature of my own existence. Not in terms of like, oh, you die and you go to Cleveland or heaven or the third ring of Narvda or whatever.
Yeah.
But that existence manifests in a different way that would be impossible for me to describe, given the fact that we are right now in the middle of this physical material plane. Okay. So it's kind of like, describe for me in English what it's like not to be describing things in English. It's like, paint a picture in the fourth dimension using only 3 dimensions, like that kind of problem.
So you're content to have your atoms recycled and mixed in with the earth again.
Well, they're not my atoms. They have been my atoms for the last 8 years. Every 8 years, your physical atoms turn over, right? That's actually a pretty good example, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the particle level, nothing about me physically is the same as it was 8 years ago.
Except the pattern.
Except the pattern. Interesting. So what is it that's persisting? Is there anything physical? If every atom turns over every 8 years, but the pattern persists, then the thing that is me
is the pattern.
Exactly, across time. Therefore, why can't that pattern persist after another physical change occurs?
Okay. Well, then how about this then? What if your pattern is preserved? Would you consider that immortality? Would you be okay with that?
If someone could preserve my pattern?
Yeah, upload it to the Matrix.
So there's like copying the pattern, and then there's the pattern in and of itself. Like you could program an AI chat bot to have the personality of Tom.
Yeah, we already have some programmers working on that.
We actually have a whole podcast sub team. In fact, this is the first example. So if any listeners are detecting any problems, it's just because we're the alpha stage of the Ped and Tom chatbots. So when you say a pattern that could be preserved and replicated,
Not replicated, just
okay,
uploaded.
just preserved.
Preserved indefinitely. Let's put it that way.
So my conjecture is that that's already what's happening.
Okay.
All right. So for example, not that this has to be the explanatory way, but the idea of reincarnation is not dissimilar to what you're describing, where the pattern which is manifest in this current physical self stops manifesting in that way at death, and then it manifests later in another physical form. So, for example, like there is only the one eternal, never having been born, never died song, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." It manifested in the 60s through the Rolling Stones, and then it manifested again through Devo later on in the 70s.
Yes.
Right? Different, similar, patterns of manifestations, but different on the form. And you might say, oh, well, the actual form of "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" is the Rolling Stones, but they were just the first one. And so we mentally attach permanency to that form just because that was the first one. That's our own cognitive bias that humans are applying. You can imagine that song being covered over and over and over again for the next 1,000 years. And what is it about that song itself? There's no one form of that song that is the full nature of that song. It's just the pattern emerging and destroying and reemerging.
Okay, sure.
So again, there's no way to prove this, but I think there are ways that you can try and experience it, try and feel it.
It'll certainly make you feel better.
I think it should be approached like a good scientist. What does a good scientist do? Keeps your mind open. You invite new evidence. You evaluate that evidence, and then you go on to the next thing. You should always be open to the new evidence.
Evidence is the clear word, right?
There you go. So yeah, I'm not worried about death now.
All right, good to know.
Okay. And you would accept immortality? You didn't answer the question originally.
I didn't answer the question. No, I didn't. You caught that.
I did slightly catch that.
I'm not sure whether I would or not. Yeah.
So now I am,
but for different reasons.
So now I'm seeing why you were pressing me so hard, devil's advocate, on the anti-death. There's a part of you that's maybe anti-death, eh? Or at least hasn't. So you're not totally ascribed to the cheerleader immortality crowd.
No, I'm not. But I like the idea of increasing the health span of people. That's a good goal. If we can live 200 years, that's probably a good goal. Immortality, that's a bit more problematic because that would create a radical change in the way human civilization evolves and just operates in general. That it might collapse in on itself in a more violent way than you would expect otherwise.
Yeah, that would be weird.
Yeah. So
I'm sure there's some good sci-fi short stories that would.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. It's one of those things that it's so good you have to be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
But a moderate expansion to your health span, I think, is a admirable goal to pursue.
So, like, where would you put all the new people, right?
Well, you have to get them off planet.
Right.
But if humans had a much longer lifespan, say 500 years, that would make interstellar travel something more realistic, right? Covering those vast distances, if you had a longer lifespan, makes it more feasible, and it also at the same time gives you a lot more room to expand.
Hey, I think I have to turn into a pumpkin.
All right. Well, before you go, I actually want to do something. I want to turn on my camera for a second.
Okay.
Because I have something I want to show you. Oh, you should see me now, right?
I don't know if I want. This is freaking me out, man. We never look at each other.
I want to show you something here. Hold on.
All right.
What do you think of that?
Oh, that is fantastic. Oh my God, I'm so happy you showed me that. So I'm looking right now at, is that the first 2-Bit Geeks t-shirt?
It is indeed.
That is unbelievably good.
This is actually
Wow.
this one's yours. I got two of them.
Oh my God, you're awesome. Early holiday gift.
Yep. So I don't
Wow.
know if anyone else will want one, but I think I'll make them available for people to get. It's just a T-shirt with the stupid 2-Bit Geeks logo on it. But if anyone cares about such a thing, I will make them available, and I'll have
So where can people go to get that?
I don't know yet. I'll put the link
Okay.
somewhere. At some future point, I'll have a link available, and I will communicate that out
Okay.
to people who might want to have one of these. But I wanted to get one for myself, and got one for you too because I thought you might like it. So there you have it.
Awesome.
Hey gang, it's Future Tom here with that link I just promised you. If you'd like to show your support for the podcast, you can purchase t-shirts from the print-on-demand service at teespring.com. You'll find the link at 2bitgeeks.com/store or in the show notes. We thank you for your support.